The rain fell in thick silver sheets, blurring the quiet street of Magnolia Lane. Inside the small wooden house, Susan Miller watched the storm through the window, her reflection trembling in the glass. The old porch light flickered, a soft halo cutting through the darkness. She'd kept it on for 20 years, every night since Daniel disappeared. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the switch. It was strange, after all this time, to imagine darkness again. Her therapist said she needed closure, that the light had become a prison of memory. Maybe tonight would set her free. Maybe it was time to let the past sleep. But when she looked at that faint glow through the rain, her heart hesitated. It wasn't just light, it was promise. It was the last piece of hope she had kept alive, stubbornly, foolishly. Still, her hand tightened. She whispered, "Goodbye, my boy." As thunder rolled above, a deep calm filled her chest, the quiet kind that comes before a storm breaks inside. She closed her eyes and pressed the switch. The porch went dark. For the first time in 20 years, the house was swallowed by shadow. She stood there, listening to the rain and her heartbeat. Then, faintly, beneath the roar of the storm, came 3 heavy knocks on the door. She froze. Maybe it was the wind, maybe her mind playing tricks again. But then came another knock, louder, urgent, unmistakably human. Susan's breath caught. Her heart raced as she stepped toward the sound, the dark swallowing her whole. When she opened the door, lightning struck and she saw him. A man stood there, drenched from head to toe, his coat clinging to him like another layer of rain. His face was pale, half hidden under a soaked hood. "Sorry," he stammered, voice trembling. "My car broke down. I just need a place to wait out the storm." For a heartbeat, Susan didn't move. The night had turned surreal. The dark house, the extinguished light, the stranger at her door. Yet something about his eyes made her step aside. "Come in," she said softly. "You're freezing." He entered with hesitant gratitude, leaving puddles on the wooden floor. She offered him a towel, her mind racing through warnings she'd once given Daniel about trusting strangers. But there was something fragile in this man, not dangerous, but lost. "Name's Jack," he muttered, rubbing his hands by the heater. His voice carried a faint southern drawl. "I didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't," she lied, though her pulse betrayed her. "It's just been a long time since anyone knocked here." Jack nodded slowly, eyes wandering around the room. Family photos covered the walls. A boy, a husband long gone, Susan at younger ages. His gaze lingered on one picture, the boy's smile bright beneath the porch light. "This your son?" he asked quietly. Susan's voice broke as she answered. "He was." Morning arrived like a sigh, pale light filtering through the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick and clean. Susan brewed coffee while Jack sat at the table, staring out the window at the gray dawn. "You from around here?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He shook his head. "Just passing through. Been driving south, I guess. Not sure where to stop anymore." His voice carried that tired note of someone who's been running for too long. He looked out at the yard, where the porch light hung dark and lifeless. "That light," he said. "It looks old. You keep it on much?" "Every night," she replied before realizing what she'd confessed. "I mean, I used to." Their eyes met briefly, a silent question hanging between them. Susan busied herself with the coffee pot, heart thudding. He seemed harmless, but there was something unsettling in how familiar his movements felt. He reached for the sugar jar, fingers brushing hers for a second too long. The touch sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but recognition she couldn't place. She pulled her hand back quickly. Jack smiled faintly, sensing her discomfort. "You don't have to worry," he said. "I'll be gone once the road's cleared." But Susan wasn't sure she wanted him to go. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the house, mingling with the scent of damp wood. Susan sat across from Jack, the table between them cluttered with half-finished thoughts. The rain had left streaks on the windows, like fingerprints of the night before. Jack noticed the old piano in the corner. "You play?" he asked, nodding toward it. She smiled sadly. "I used to. My son loved to sing while I played." Something flickered in Jack's eyes, a flash of memory perhaps, or pain. "What kind of songs?" "Old ones," she replied. "Ones he thought no one his age should love. He'd sing them loud, off-key but happy." Her voice softened. "That light on the porch, it was always on for him." Jack's gaze drifted toward the window again, where the lamp still hung cold and dark. "You must have loved him very much," he murmured. "I still do," she said. "Love doesn't turn off like a switch." Silence lingered between them, thick as the morning fog. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking, letting strips of light fall across the porch. Susan thought, for the first time, that maybe she'd turned off the wrong light. Jack looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes," he whispered, "the things we lose aren't really gone, they just forget how to find us." The day passed in quiet rhythms, dishes clinking, rainwater dripping from the roof, the slow hum of the heater. Jack dozed on the couch, while Susan sorted through old boxes she'd sworn never to open again. Inside, she found Daniel's baseball cap, a birthday card, a cassette tape labeled Mom and Me. Her fingers trembled as she placed it in the old tape deck. The sound cracked, but the melody that emerged stopped her breath. It was Daniel's voice, laughing, singing along. Jack stirred, eyes half open. The sound seemed to pierce him. "That song," he whispered, sitting up. "I know that song." Susan turned to him, stunned. "You can't. My son made it up." But Jack's eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Then why do I remember it?" The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Susan felt the room tilt, memories rushing like floodwater. Who was this man she had let into her home? Outside, the sky darkened again, thunder rumbling in the distance. Inside, two souls sat frozen, one haunted by loss, the other by a memory that shouldn't exist. And far beyond them, the porch light flickered once, faintly, as if deciding whether to glow again. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the house still felt heavy with thunder. Susan sat at the piano, her fingers grazing keys that hadn't sung in years. The silence between the notes was louder than sound itself. Jack leaned in the doorway, his shadow long and still. The storm had gone quiet, but something else had started. "Do you play?" Jack asked, his voice cautious, like he was afraid to break something fragile. Susan smiled faintly, eyes distant with memory. "Not anymore," she said softly, her voice trembling like the air around them. "My son used to sing while I played." The words landed gently, but they shook her heart. Jack took a step closer, as though drawn by the weight of her silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead began to hum. The sound was small, broken, uncertain. Susan froze mid-breath when she recognized the tune Daniel's song. Her eyes widened as disbelief took hold of her. "Where did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice sharp as glass. Jack blinked, confused, like waking from a dream. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "It just came to me. I swear I didn't mean to." His voice trembled like a chord struck too hard. "It feels like something I've always known." Susan stood, her heartbeat a drum in her chest. "Jack," she said carefully, "that song was Daniel's. He made it up when he was 10. The room seemed to darken with her words. Jack's lips parted, eyes wide, searching her face for something he didn't understand. "Then why can I remember it?" he whispered. Neither moved. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock and the breath they both forgot to take. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, brushing against the window like a ghost. The air was thick, waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. Every second stretched like forever. Susan closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe you don't remember it, Jack. Maybe it remembered you." Her voice trembled, and for the first time in years, the house seemed to breathe again. Morning arrived, pale and trembling, light slipping through curtains like soft water. Susan sat at the kitchen table, an old scrapbook open in front of her. The pages smelled of dust and time, the edges curled with years of touch. Daniel's smile stared up from every photo, young and full of joy. Her fingers brushed across his face gently. Jack entered quietly, drawn by the faint turning of pages. He stood behind her, looking over her shoulder with hesitant curiosity. "He looks happy," he said, voice careful. "He had your eyes." Susan nodded, a sad smile crossing her lips. "He was my light," she said. "He made everything mean something." Her words carried both warmth and ached. She turned the page, revealing Daniel on the swing set behind their house. Jack's expression shifted, something like recognition flickered behind his eyes. "That place," he murmured. "I've been there before." Susan frowned, closing the book halfway. "That's impossible," she said quickly, her voice thin with nerves. Jack pressed a hand to his temple, shaking his head. "No," he said, voice cracking. "I remember the swing. I fell from it and someone ran to me." He looked at her, tears forming. "You were there, Susan. You lifted me." The air seemed to vanish between them. Every sound in the room stopped. Susan's body went cold. "You couldn't know that," she said, her voice trembling. "You weren't there, Jack." But her heart told her something else. something she couldn't explain away. He looked terrified, yet his words felt alive with truth. The scrapbook lay open between them like a doorway. Jack whispered, "Every time I close my eyes, I see this house, I hear that porch light humming, I smell the rain." He pressed his palms against his face, shaking. "It's like I've lived this before." His voice faded into the quiet. The room felt too small for so much memory. Susan closed the book slowly, pressing it to her chest. "Maybe," she said gently, her voice breaking, "you didn't lose your past. Maybe it's been trying to find you." Her eyes glistened with something between fear and hope. The storm returned at night, fierce and restless, rattling the windows with rage. Jack sat on the floor beside the fireplace, his hands covering his ears. His breathing was erratic, his body trembling like a child's. Susan knelt beside him, her heart racing with confusion and dread. The thunder sounded like memory coming alive. "Jack, look at me," she said, her voice both command and plea. "What are you seeing?" He lifted his face, tears streaking down his cheeks. "A car, headlights, the bridge, water everywhere," he whispered. "Someone screaming my name." His voice cracked. "She sounded like you." Susan's breath caught. "The Savannah Bridge?" she asked, hardly believing what she was saying. Jack nodded quickly, pressing his palms into his eyes. "I ran that night," he said, trembling. "There was a fight, confusion, and then darkness." His voice was a raw wound, and then silence for years. Lightning flashed outside, painting the room in bursts of white. Susan grabbed his shoulders, grounding him. "You're safe now," she said, but her voice shook. "Whatever happened, it's over." Jack looked up at her, broken and childlike. "It doesn't feel over," he said. "It feels like it's starting again." The thunder roared louder, shaking the glass in the windows. Jack's eyes darted toward the porch. "That light," he murmured, pointing, "it's calling me." His words came out like a confession. "It's always been calling me back." The storm screamed outside like something alive. Susan turned toward the window, her reflection blending with his in the glass. "Maybe it's not calling you back," she said softly. "Maybe it's calling you home." The words filled the air like a prayer. Jack's shoulders fell, his breath slowing, surrendering to something larger. And in that moment, as thunder rolled into distance, the porch light flickered once in the dark, faint, trembling, and alive. Dawn came slow, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth and morning. Susan sat on the couch with a wooden box in her lap, her hands trembling. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each addressed to Daniel. She hadn't opened them in years. Her breath caught as she unfolded one. The ink had faded, but the ache was fresh. "Dear Daniel," she read softly, "it's been 3 years. I keep the porch light on, just in case. I hope you still like the smell of rain." Her voice faltered, her eyes watering. Jack stirred on the couch nearby, hearing her whisper. "What are those?" he asked. "Letters to my son," she said, "ones he never read." He sat up, his gaze steady but uncertain. "May I read them?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Susan hesitated, then handed him one with trembling fingers. Jack unfolded the paper carefully. As his eyes moved over the words, his expression changed. Confusion, pain, and something like recognition. He began to cry quietly. "These words," he said, choking on air, "they feel familiar. Every line feels like something I've heard before." Susan's stomach tightened. "Jack," she whispered, "what are you saying?" He looked at her helplessly. "It's like these letters are written to me." His voice broke on the last word. She shook her head, disbelief and fear mingling in her chest. "That's impossible," she said, her voice shaking. "You couldn't know." Jack pressed the letter to his heart, whispering, "I remember the porch, the smell of coffee, your voice in the rain." His eyes glistened with truth. He didn't understand. Susan reached for his hand, her pulse wild and trembling. "Jack," she said, her tone breaking, "please stop." He met her gaze through tears. "I can't," he whispered, "because when I hear your voice, I remember who I was." The words hung like thunder that never ended. Outside, the porch light swayed gently in the wind. Its glow pulsed softly through the rain, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Night fell again, quiet and heavy, carrying the scent of wet wood and rain. The house felt smaller, as if the walls were listening. Susan sat across from Jack, a candle flickering between them. Their tea had gone cold, untouched. Every breath they took seemed to echo in the silence. Jack spoke first, voice low and steady. "Why do I feel like I've always known you?" he asked. Susan's eyes softened, her lips trembling. "Maybe because you have," she whispered, Her words floated through the dim light like smoke. The clock ticked in slow, uneven rhythm behind them. Susan leaned forward, heart pounding. "Jack," she said quietly, "what are you trying to tell me?" He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Every dream I have leads here," he said. "Every song, every storm, it all ends with you." His words filled the room with quiet thunder. Without meaning to, she whispered, "Daniel." The name trembled through the air like lightning. Jack froze, his breath catching. He didn't correct her. His lips parted slowly. "That name," he said, voice shaking. "It feels like home." The candle flame flickered wildly. Susan's tears fell silently. "It can't be," she whispered, though her soul wanted to believe. "You can't be him." Jack reached for her hand, his fingers trembling as they met hers. "Maybe I don't remember everything," he said, "but I remember love. I remember light." Outside, thunder rolled softly over Savannah, distant but kind. The porch light glowed faintly through the storm, its steady pulse warm and forgiving. The air felt new again, like something reborn. The darkness didn't feel as dark anymore. For the first time in 20 years, Susan smiled through her tears. The light she had kept burning had finally found the one it was waiting for. Jack's note lay on the table, a tangle of apologies and fear. Susan read it twice, the words blurring like rain on glass. He was sorry, he said, and he didn't deserve her kindness. He needed to remember alone, far from the light that hurt and healed. She grabbed her keys before courage changed its mind. The night air tasted of metal and wet pine. Streetlights smeared across the windshield as she drove, chasing the thin thread of his route. She checked the gas station on River Road and asked the sleepy clerk. He remembered a pale man buying coffee with shaking hands. He had headed toward the river without an umbrella. Susan followed the road that had haunted 20 winters of dreams. The tires hummed like a prayer whispered too often. She passed the old diner where Daniel once promised her a song for dessert. The sign was broken now, but the memory burned bright. She drove faster when the rain began again. At the overlook, she found footprints slanting toward the darkness. The river sounded louder than any storm, a body breathing in the night. Susan called his name, and the wind carried it away. Only the porch light in her memory answered back. It flickered behind her eyes like a stubborn star. She parked by the path that led to the bridge. The rails gleamed slick, silver ribs against the sky. A floodlight flickered near the maintenance gate. Beyond it, the water rolled like moving glass. Susan tightened her coat and kept walking. Halfway there, a figure appeared at the edge of the bridge. He stood in profile, rain carving bright lines down his face. Susan stopped, afraid to breathe wrong and break everything. The river roared, asking old questions. She took one step, then another, then another. "Jack," she called, and her voice did not break this time. He turned slowly, as if pulled by a tide inside him. The storm softened in respect to the moment. His eyes searched hers like a traveler reading a map home. The bridge held its breath for the truth to arrive. Lightning stitched the clouds, then left them trembling. Jack gripped the rail, his knuckles bone white. "I didn't mean to leave," he said, voice thin in the rain. "I only meant to stop hurting you." The wind swallowed half the words and returned the rest. Susan stepped closer, shoes slipping, heart steadying. "You did not hurt me," she said, "because the real wound was older. You woke what I buried to survive." Her breath fogged between them, a tender veil. "Tell me what you remember, one piece at a time." He closed his eyes and pressed his palms to his head. "There was a fight with a man I trusted," he said carefully. "There was shouting in a parking lot, and I ran. Sirens screamed somewhere, then faded into years. I reached this bridge and heard a woman calling my name. I climbed," he continued, voice breaking on the word. "The rail was cold, and the water looked soft like velvet." He shook his head as if to scatter nightmares. "I slipped, or maybe I jumped, and everything went dark." A long silence spread its wings and settled. "When I woke, a woman with kind eyes asked my name," he said. "My mouth gave her another answer, and the answer stuck." He drifted through shelters in small towns like a leaf. Work came and went, and so did versions of himself. Only storms ever brought a whisper of home. Susan reached for his hand and did not let it go. "Your name is Daniel," she said, and the world did not end. The river kept breathing like a creature that knew mercy. The bridge stopped shaking because they did. Jack's shoulders finally dropped under the weight of truth. He tried the name on his tongue and found it warm. "Daniel," he said, and the sky brightened a fraction. The rain slowed as if to listen better. Susan started to cry, and did not hide it. The past touched the present and recognized its own face. They left the bridge slowly, like swimmers learning land again. Daniel's steps were uncertain, but they were his. Susan kept his hand, an anchor disguised as a touch. The storm dwindled into dripping trees and shy thunder. A small bird shook rain from its wings and flew in the car. The heater hummed a steady lullaby. Daniel stared at his reflection in the window and saw 2 decades of fog. He tried to summon a birthday memory and caught only fragments: a cake, a candle, a laugh that sounded like home. He closed his eyes and listened for the porch. "Do you remember the song?" Susan asked softly. He nodded, uncertain and brave at once. His voice rose, wobbly but sincere, and found the melody's bones. The tune filled the car like warm light in winter. Susan harmonized on the parts her heart remembered. Notes unlocked pictures with gentle clicks. A dog's collar ringing in a sunlit kitchen, a baseball cap thrown at a lamp and missing, the smell of cinnamon when rain touched the roof, a piano bench too small for 2 people, a boy laughing because squeezed love makes better music. They parked outside the house that had grown old, waiting. The porch looked weary, and the swing sighed in the wind. Susan turned to him with a question shaped like a smile. "Are you ready to see the light again?" she asked. Daniel breathed in and nodded carefully. "Tonight it means something new," she said. "It is not a beacon of grief anymore." She took the spare bulb from the drawer with ceremonial care. He watched her hands like a student learning a sacred craft. The moment felt both fragile and unbreakable. Susan screwed the bulb into the old socket with slow grace. Daniel stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, rain soft and bright. She flicked the switch and let the glow find the night. The light answered with patience, steady and alive. The house sighed, and so did they. Morning arrived with honeyed light and the smell of wet earth. Susan brewed coffee that tasted like starting over. Daniel stood on the porch with a blanket and watched the neighborhood wake. Cars whispered by like careful promises. The light clicked off with the sunrise and rested. They spoke in gentle steps and did not rush the road. Names returned like shy birds landing on a fence. Some flew away, some stayed, some asked for seeds of patience. Daniel remembered a teacher with red glasses and a kindness. He remembered a joke that still worked. They made a list on a yellow pad at the kitchen table. Doctor, therapist, legal help, old friends, new work. Beside each word, Susan drew a small square to check. Daniel added piano and felt braver for it. The list looked like a map instead of a sentence. After lunch, they walked to the community center, 3 blocks away. The director listened like a person who believed in Mondays. He offered a small job and a quiet room for practice. Daniel said yes because the word felt like breath. Susan thanked him with eyes that had learned sunrise again. They returned home carrying cheap flowers and expensive hope. Daniel tuned the old piano with cautious hands and patience. Susan set the flowers by the window where the light softened them. The house felt larger by a few good inches. Even the stairs sounded kinder underfoot. At dusk, neighbors slowed their steps to stare and smile. Word traveled the way jasmine travels, gentle and sure. The porch light waited, unlit, for now, content in its promise. Susan and Daniel ate soup that tasted like comfort. They laughed at nothing and everything, and both. When night finally settled, Susan stood by the switch again. She looked at Daniel and did not need a speech. She turned the light on for joy and not for rescue. The glow reached the street like a long-held breath exhaled. The darkness stepped back without argument or drama. Years later, the house kept its gentle duties without complaint. The porch boards creaked in their favorite places. The piano sang on weekdays and rested on Sundays. Jasmine threaded the fence with patient hands. The light learned the art of glowing without grief. Susan wrote the story she had once only survived. She wrote slowly because some truths asked for tea and time. She left the hard edges in so other hearts could climb. She left soft places where strangers could rest. She read it aloud to Daniel on rainy afternoons. Daniel taught music to children who painted off-key notes with pride. He told them that every song is a door with many hinges. He told them that silence has a rhythm worth listening to. He told them that getting lost is not the same as ending. He told them that light travels faster inside the chest. On summer nights, neighbors brought folding chairs to the lawn. The air tasted of peaches and porch stories. Susan kept extra cups because hope is thirsty. Daniel played the old melody and the new one that followed at home. The audience learned the chorus without being asked. Sometimes sorrow visited like an old classmate. It stood in the yard and waved across years. Susan waved back and did not invite it in. Daniel nodded politely and returned to the keys. The porch light watched and minded its golden business. One evening, a woman stopped at the gate with tears that needed directions. Susan met her halfway and gave her the map she had made. Daniel played softer so the heart could hear itself. The woman listened, breathed, and kept standing. The light did what lights do and stayed. For the first time, another house down the street hung a small lamp, then another, and another, until the block learned a starry language. Susan smiled because multiplying light is easy math. Daniel smiled because returning is a verb you practice. The night agreed, and the neighborhood glowed like a promise.